This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Monday, October 19th. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on, and we appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. Ballot counting is underway Monday in Guinea following a largely peaceful day on Sunday in which voters decided whether to give 82-year-old President Alpha Conde a third mandate made possible by a constitutional change in March. Conde's decision to run for a third term sparked months of deadly protests. David Doyle reports.
Polls opened in Guinea on Sunday with incumbent President Alpha Conde hoping to extend his decade in power. That third term has been made possible by a new constitution that prompted months of protests in which, according to Amnesty International, at least 50 people have died. Violence has also erupted during campaigning in recent weeks.
Donnez votre voix, mais ne donnez pas votre vie.
But at a polling station in the capital, Conakry, voter Amape said what unites Guineans is stronger than what divides them, and he hopes they will give their votes, not their lives. However, the United Nations has warned of divisive appeals to ethnic affiliations on the campaign trail. Conde and his main rival, Cellou Diallo, both draw much of their support from their respective ethnic communities. Diallo, a former prime minister who was runner-up to Conde in 2010 and 2015, has warned of fraud in the election and says he will challenge any irregularities. Many political analysts expect Conde to prevail after he won overwhelming approval for the constitutional change, though that vote was boycotted by the opposition. Conde says the reform was constitutional and democratic and argues that he needs another term to finish major mining and infrastructure projects. Under his stewardship, Guinea has made progress in developing its mineral riches, including bauxite and iron ore, and GDP has doubled over the past 10 years. But many Guineans complain that the mining boom has not ended frequent power cuts or unemployment.
That was David Doyle of Reuters reporting. The leader of Sudan's transitional government is pledging to cooperate with the International Criminal Court in its case against former autocratic leader Omar al-Bashir. Prime Minister Abdalla Hamdok met Sunday with a delegation from the ICC led by Prosecutor Fatou Bensouda. The ICC has issued arrest warrants for Bashir on charges of genocide and crimes against humanity in connection with the unrest in the western Darfur region in 2003. Al-Bashir reacted to an insurgency in Darfur against his regime by sending the Janjaweed militias, which are accused of killing up to 300,000 people and driving as many as 2.5 million people from their homes. He was overthrown by the military in April 2019, following mass demonstrations in Khartoum and across the country that began in December of 2018. He is currently serving a 2-year prison sentence in Sudan on corruption charges and is currently on trial for the 1989 coup that brought him to power. African diaspora organizers say the United States 2020 election is drawing more African-born immigrants eligible to vote. But as VOA Salam Solomon reports, some argue that they are not organized enough to constitute a voting bloc relative to other immigrant communities in the U.S.
The African diaspora in the United States is mobilizing voter drives as organizers believe 2020 is a time for these voters to flex their political muscles as never before. Nika Achapu is the founder of the African Public Affairs Committee, a nonpartisan political organization that advocates policies for the empowerment of the African diaspora.
Our goal is to empower people into learning that they have a voice, they have a say in the policies, in the laws that are actually brought forth and are affecting us as Africans living in this country.
According to the latest U.S. Census figures, in 2018, there were over 2 million foreign-born Africans in the country. Overall, 50.6% of immigrants are naturalized citizens and 94.4% are 18 years old or older and likely have voting rights. But the diverse and dispersed nature of the population in the U.S. makes it hard for African voters to organize. Although there are concentrated population centers in several cities, including Minneapolis, Washington, D.C., Houston, and New York City, the African diaspora does not speak with a single voice. There are no definitive surveys as to the political leanings of African diaspora, says John Campbell, a senior fellow for Africa Policy Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington, D.C.
They are not big enough or organized enough to constitute a voting bloc, unlike some other ethnic identities in the United States.
But organizers say concerns of U.S. voters of African descent aren't much different than the U.S. population at large: the economy, education, healthcare, and security. Because many African immigrants work in frontline roles, the COVID-19 response is a major concern.
A lot of our African diaspora members are in the trenches and working, whether it's in the medical field, whether it is in transporting people, whether it's bagging groceries. We are pretty much everywhere.
And the power of voters from the African diaspora appears to be growing. Between 2010 and 2018, the sub-Saharan Africa population in the U.S. increased by 52%. On a national level, several African politicians have made waves. In 2018, Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota became the first Somali American elected to Congress, and Representative Joe Neguse of Colorado, born in the U.S. to Eritrean parents, became the first person of Eritrean origin elected to Congress. A study by the Pew Research Center showed that, contrary to stereotypes, African immigrants to the U.S. on average are more likely to be college-educated and employed than the population at large.
I think that it's very hard to pigeonhole them. That, like Americans in general, they will vote for whichever candidate personally appeals to them the most.
But one issue voters of African descent are particularly concerned about is immigration. Organizers say many came as immigrants or have family members that have immigrated to the country. Each year, tens of thousands of Africans are admitted to the U.S. as refugees, escaping places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Somalia, and Eritrea. Because of this, Africans are particularly concerned with recent changes to the immigration system, restricting numbers of immigrants. In 2016, the U.S. admitted nearly 85,000 refugees, including 31,000 from Africa. In 2020, the U.S. will admit a total of 18,000 refugees and 15,000 in 2021. The U.S. State Department says the reduction reaffirms America's enduring commitment to assist the world's most vulnerable people while fulfilling our first duty to protect and serve the American people. Sam Fanti, a Washington, D.C.-based political strategist who's organizing a voter drive in Georgia and Kentucky to register immigrant citizens, said recent U.S. policies like a travel ban that has cut off immigrant visas to several African countries and highly publicized deportations of Africans are galvanizing voters.
They feel the need to go out and vote now in order to protect themselves and their families. Many African families have been here for 2, 3, 4, or even more generations. And so they feel like their children and their children's children need to be protected now. And so they are now galvanizing support from one another in their communities to register to vote in order to defeat and change some of those policies now.
The immigration issue is making African diaspora voters more active and outspoken than in recent memory, Fanti says.
If we are in this country and we are paying taxes, we need to vote and we need to do something when it comes to some of these policies that are directly now affecting them. So when a policy directly affects somebody, be sure that they are going to take action. And that is what the African diaspora community, when it comes to immigration policy, are now gathering themselves in their small groups.
In Texas, Achapu's organization has been hosting voter registration and census drives. Achapu added that she is encouraging people of African descent, including first-time voters, to research candidates on local level and ask them questions about the issues that matter most.
That's when you can decide, okay, this is the candidate that represent my values, my morals, and what I think means progress.
Salam Solomon, VOA News, Washington.
Michigan's 270,000 registered Muslim American voters could determine the outcome of the presidential contest in the battleground state, as we hear from VOA's Ken Farbar.
For Michigan voter Dr. Mahmoud Al-Hadidi, there is one issue above all others on his mind when he casts a ballot in the November election: respect.
The Muslim community would like to be acknowledged as part of this great American nation and not as an alien culture to this nation. The Muslim community would like to be treated with respect.
In 2016, the emergency room physician supported Democrat Hillary Clinton for president. He also supported Democrat Gretchen Whitmer in her successful run for Michigan's governorship in 2018. But this time around, he isn't sure if he'll support former Vice President Joe Biden or Republican President Donald Trump.
I would like some of my concerns addressed before I make up my mind.
One concern is the U.S. government's terrorist screening database, commonly known as the watch list, which many Muslim Americans feel targets innocent members of their community.
Definitely that list should be updated, and those who are wrongfully on that list should have their dignity back, and they should be removed. And that will be something fair and just.
Dr. Al-Hadidi says he would also like to see a Muslim American appointed to a high-ranking position in the next administration.
You've got to tell people something to excite them to go out and vote. Just because Biden is not Trump is not a good reason for me to go out and vote.
Osama Siblani is the publisher of the Arab American News, a website and newspaper popular with Michigan's large Arab and Muslim American community.
But there is like 50-60% of our community are not excited by the Biden-Harris campaign. They're disgusted with the Trump campaign.
Siblani says many in the community are outraged over the Trump administration's ban on travelers from some countries with majority Muslim populations, a ban Biden pledges to remove. But he said there is also recognition and support for Trump's efforts to secure peace and reduce U.S. troop levels in the Middle East.
Even though with whatever Trump being characterized, we would like to have a conversation with the Trump administration. I believe that there are some issues that we're very interested in. I think that him not being a very hawkish on war in the region, that's very important to us. He has support, but it's not substantial.
It's not that people are deciding between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Oftentimes it's between Joe Biden and not voting.
Dr. Abdul El-Sayed is an epidemiologist who ran against Whitmer for the Democratic nomination for Michigan governor in 2018. Today, he is chair of the Political Action Committee, Southpaw, Michigan.
But the point that I'll always make to the community is that, you are voting for your own political power, right? As the proportion of Arab Americans voting and Muslim Americans voting in elections grows, it forces politicians to pay attention, because if they want those votes, that can mean the difference between victory and defeat.
A recent poll of American Muslims by the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding shows about 78% of those eligible to vote are registered, an 18% increase since 2016.
There is no Muslim monolith, right? No one community thinks with one mind. I mean, we are a diverse community, just like every community in this country.
Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Dearborn, Michigan.
We'll have more on the U.S. presidential election coming up later in the broadcast. The Nigerian army says it is embarking Tuesday on a 2-month nationwide exercise dubbed Operation Crocodile Smile. This is the first time the annual exercise, usually limited to the country's Delta region, will be coast to coast. Nigeria has been engulfed by nationwide protests calling for reforms and the disbandment of the police special anti-robbery squad. The army warned last week of subversive elements and troublemakers and says it is ready to step in and restore order. Femi Fani-Kayode of the opposition People's Democratic Party says that any use of the military against protests would lead to the end of Nigeria. It was meant to be a 3.5-year motorbiking adventure across all 7 continents, but then Kenyan newlyweds Das and Wamoyo Kariuki ran into COVID-19. Francis Maguire reports.
2 months after getting married, Kenyan couple Dos and Wamoyo Karaoke quit their jobs and set off on an adventure to motorbike across all 7 continents. They didn't expect that a changing world would bring what was meant to be a 3.5-year odyssey to a screeching halt.
For me, this has been the best honeymoon. I think he's more than a husband, he's my true friend.
They set off in 2018, and having travelled through Africa, Antarctica and South America by March this year, they were in Costa Rica.
Good morning, guys. Today is what date this? 14th. It's 14th of March, and we are leaving Costa Rica into Nicaragua.
But Nicaragua would prove to be their final destination. With lockdown restrictions coming into force across the globe, the couple found themselves stuck at a low-price hostel in the Nicaragua capital, Managua, for 4.5 months. When flights resumed in August, they shipped their bikes home and returned to Nairobi.
And getting stuck outside the country, we looked forward to being home. And the things that we have really missed over the 2 years of travel, we missed the food, we missed our family and friends, so it's really nice to have them back.
Well, Muyu, who worked in the petroleum industry, says it was the kind of adventure that Africans don't often take. And Dos, who was employed in finance, says the experience has changed them.
On your motorcycle, you can't carry any luxury items. And we went by for 2 years without any luxury items. So I think the minimalist living is who we are now.
This is in Botswana.
When the world opens up again, they want to resume their expedition and hope to inspire other Africans to do the same.
Reuters' Francis Maguire with that report. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, in the countdown to the U.S. presidential election, millions of voters choose to cast their ballots ahead of Election Day. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Africa 54. Over the next 2 weeks, Africa 54 will bring you a series of short videos to help explain some of what is going on in the U.S. presidential election. We start with a quick history of the Democratic Party.
Hello, everyone. Ahead of the 2020 presidential elections in the United States, VOA Africa is offering a series of explanatory and educational videos that will allow you to better understand the workings of the American electoral process. Compared to some African countries where dozens of parties are running for president, the American electoral map is rather simple. On November 3rd, millions of American voters will choose mainly between red, the color of the Republican Party, or blue, the color of the Democratic Party, the elephant or the donkey. The Democratic Party is the focus of today's explainer. What do we know about candidate Joe Biden's party? What are its ideals and its history?
The Democratic Party is known for favoring a larger federal government as well as liberal social policies. However, this was not always the case. In 1792, when founding fathers Thomas Jefferson and James Madison formed the Democratic-Republican Party, which will later become the Democratic Party, they want the federal government to have a smaller role and more people involved in the democratic process, not just the elite. In 1829, President Andrew Jackson expands on those ideals. He wants an even smaller federal government and champions enlarging the electorate to all white men from just landowners. African American men do not gain the right to vote until 1870, and women gain the right to vote in 1920. The Democratic Party splits geographically in 1860 in the lead up to the Civil War. Northern Democrats and Southern Democrats disagree over the issue of slavery and preserving the Union. When the South loses the Civil War in 1865, the Democratic Party loses its national prominence for several generations, while the Republican Party of Abraham Lincoln dominates the political landscape. By 1912, when the first Southern Democrat is elected president since the end of the Civil War, the party has become more progressive. President Woodrow Wilson champions the woman's vote, which is ratified in 1920. It isn't until the Great Depression when Democrats regain their political dominance, led by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who expands the role of the federal government. Many African American voters switched to the Democratic Party because of Roosevelt's policies. In the mid-1960s, Lyndon Johnson passes civil rights legislation as well as more government social programs. In recent decades, Democrats and Republicans have traded control over the presidency. The most recent Democratic president, Barack Obama, is the first African American president, and he expanded the government's role in healthcare.
Be sure to join us Tuesday for a short history of the U.S. Republican Party. With more than 2 weeks to go before the November 3rd U.S. election, presidential candidates Donald Trump and Joe Biden are driving home their message to voters. Michelle Quinn reports.
This week, U.S. presidential candidates President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden will continue to travel the country to press their case to voters. The two are scheduled to meet Thursday in Nashville, Tennessee, for a 90-minute in-person debate. The topics released by the Nonpartisan Commission on Presidential Debates include race in America, climate change, and fighting COVID-19, the disease caused by the coronavirus. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat from California, has given the White House until the end of Tuesday to approve an economic relief package that could inject between $1.8 and $2 billion into the U.S. economy, which continues to suffer due to the coronavirus pandemic. Disagreements exist over how much funding to provide to state and local governments, among other things.
Because we want to have an agreement, we can come to negotiation, and we can do it now. What's the difference a few days, except that we could have it before the election, which we wanted as soon as possible.
Around the United States, more than 27 million people have already voted, about 6 times the number of people who did so at the same point in 2016, according to a University of Florida professor tracking turnout. So far, Democratic counties have seen higher turnout than Republican ones. As polls show that Trump is trailing Biden in several key battleground states, some Republicans are distancing themselves from the president or expressing concern that Biden might win. But Ronna McDaniel, chair of the Republican National Committee, says Republicans are going to show up for the president on Election Day.
We are seeing this huge energy, and we are seeing really great numbers coming out for the president. And this is a race. And any Republican that doesn't recognize that running with the president is going to help them is hurting themselves in the long run.
In the final stretch before Election Day, candidates will work to generate enthusiasm and hope their supporters get out to vote. Michelle Quinn, VOA News.
The United States is seeing unprecedented numbers of voters who are choosing to cast ballots ahead of the November 3rd presidential election. More than 14 million Americans have voted already, at least 10 times the norm at this point, and millions more are expected to do so before Election Day. VOA's Caroline Presutti examines who is voting and how that could affect the outcome of the presidential election.
It says indefinite voluntary departure. That meant I was never coming back.
As a young girl, Rita Rad was part of Operation Peter Pan, as thousands of children left communist Cuba in the early 1960s. She fears a slide to socialism if Democrat Joe Biden becomes president.
This flirting with socialism and with the leftist kind of thing or whatever, that's a big mistake for our country, a big mistake.
Biden is a moderate, but that doesn't sway Rad, who chose to vote early for President Donald Trump, hand-delivering her ballot.
I have an idea.
Some say that every day is Election Day in Florida because it has more early voters than any other state in the country. More than 1 million Floridians like Rita Rad have already cast their ballots. Even a stroke couldn't keep Mike Webley from voting early in person. He's for Joe Biden.
He has a better idea of what's needed to get this country back on track, and that his policies are more inclusive.
Across the country, voters are smashing early voting records, either in person or by mail. The top reason? The coronavirus.
Social distancing among some groups doesn't seem to be a standard fare, so again, that's why I'm doing absentee this year.
Not Christian Johnson. He's selling T-shirts promoting November 3rd as Election Day. That's when he'll vote for Biden.
Everybody's scared now. You got the coronavirus, you got this and that. You know what I'm saying? But you have to live too. You know what I'm saying? You can't be scared forever or live in a bubble forever.
Trump and Biden differ on when their supporters should vote. The president encourages voters to go in person on Election Day, asserting without evidence that voting by mail is plagued by fraud.
Be very careful, a lot of shenanigans going on.
From Joe Biden, a different message.
You can still request your vote by mail ballot and do it as soon as you can.
Historically, Republicans were more likely to vote early. Not this year. According to the University of Florida's Election Project, early voting Democrats are outpacing Republicans by a 2-to-1 margin. Rich Exner crunches political statistics for Cleveland.com.
It seems like the intensity is higher than I've ever noticed before in terms of not only people voting early, but wanting to get their ballot in early.
It's the same in Virginia, second only to Florida in the number of early voters.
Yeah, I have to work today, but this is more important right now.
If the trend continues, it could signal record turnout, far beyond the 55% that voted in 2016. Caroline Presutti, VOA News, Miami, Florida.
That's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, we thank you for watching.